Showtime! Welcome to the show, folks. I'm excited tonight. Settle in, get in your comfy chair, get the coffee going, get the tea going, get the juice going, get a hot chocolate going. Tonight, Nosferatu, Vampire, the undead vampires. One of my favorite subjects, folks. We're going to delve into vampires tonight. Now, you know, outside, the leaves are gone completely off the trees now, folks. You know, there's that ominous feeling in the air of something impending. It's a night that you're going to want to settle in and listen to the show, watch the show wherever you are in Canada, and just relax. Take this time for yourself. It's a creepy night out there. Don't venture outside tonight. Just join us for our ride tonight. We're going to be talking about vampires the whole night. Our guest tonight is from Montreal. Her name is Nancy Kilpatrick. She's got a new book out filled with Canadian vampire stories. Don't go anywhere. It's going to be a creepy one, folks. Strap in and hang on. Here we go.
There is a time to question. There is a time for answers. There is a time to challenge. There is a time to speculate. There is a time for change. There is a time for truth. The time is now. Welcome to Night Fright, your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy radio. And now your host, Brent Holland.
Welcome, folks. Welcome to the show. I'm Brent Holland. Welcome to Night Fright, folks. Tonight we're going to be talking about vampires. Nancy Kilpatrick's joining us. She's all the way from Montreal. She's got a new book out called Evolve 2. It's pack-filled with vampire stories. Now, just let me read a little bit off the back here. Whatever apocalyptic events might lie ahead for our species, vampires, the eternal predators, will still be with us. How will the future unfold for both species? Are the undead capable of controlling their urges? Can we resist the desire to stake them through the heart? Will we be best of friends? Who knows? I mean, look at the way vampires have evolved, right? And that's what we're going to be talking about. Or will our sinfully seductive new neighbors literally have us over for dinner? I want to welcome Nancy Kilpatrick back to the show. Hiya, Nancy, all the way from Montreal, folks.
Hi, Brett. How are you doing?
Oh,
it's been a long time.
Well. It sure has. Last time you were on the show, I believe Mark Lefebvre was on. We were up in Sudbury still.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's great. So, how are things in Montreal ce soir?
Cold.
Yeah, ici aussi. Yeah, it's cold here too. But you have one advantage that we don't. You have Fairmount bagels. So there you go.
Oh, yes. Well, yes. We have two types of bagels here. You know that.
I know. I'm an ex-Montrealer.
Fairmount and St. Vieto. There's two different ones. They're always like in competition.
I know, but we don't talk about the other ones.
You don't talk about the other.
No.
We went through this before. I
Absolutely.
tried to get you to open yourself to different bagel levels, but no.
Do I look like a guy capable of change?
Yeah, you do.
Brown. Let's talk about your great new book, Evolve 2. Now, what's the idea behind the book, Nancy?
Well, I was on your show, I guess it was a year ago, for the first book, was Evolve. And that book, the idea was to take vampires as they are today and basically show where the vampire has evolved to since its inception, which was, you can go back to 2500 BC and look at the Epic of Gilgamesh, and in that book, or not book, but in that writing, you will see the vampire portrayed as the death bringer, and the vampire has been with us in mostly every culture since the beginning of recorded history. So I wanted to show the evolution.
Can I just stop you there for a second? Many people don't know about the Epic of Gilgamesh. Can you just Can you just explain?
Really?
Yeah.
That's very hard to believe.
Go figure, right?
You mean those old texts that were carved in stone? What? 2500 BC? It should be on the tip of everybody's tongue. But it was the first real story that was written, because obviously in the early days of anything that was chiseled, it was pretty much commerce, but somebody managed to come up with a story, and the Epic of Gilgamesh is a kind of a story of a king and you know, battles and that sort of thing. But in there, you have a character, if you will, that is the Deathbringer, and that is like the vampire that brings death to humanity in a form that we can kind of understand. So the vampire has existed in a lot of cultures, not all, but just about all, maybe 3 or 4 no, but all the other ones since the beginning of recorded history. And essentially what I was trying to do with the book is to say, okay, we've come this far as a species, a human species, and the vampire has also come along with us. So where is the vampire at now? Which might seem like a silly thing to think about, because everybody goes to the movies and sees Twilight and watches television and sees True Blood. So that's where the vampire is now. But the vampire in literature has a really long and a very remarkable history. And I wanted to show the written vampire, what writers do, which is always way ahead of what television and movies do. Where is the vampire now? What are they seeing today? So Evolve was that. And when I finished Evolve, there was a feeling in me that I wanted to take it a little further, because the vampire could be perceived in the future by writers who have that visionary quality about them. So I came up with Evolve 2, which is vampire stories of the future, basically. And the writers came up with some amazing stories. The book is divided into 3 sections, which I think tells it all. It's pre-apocalypse, which would be more or less 2012-ish, post-apocalypse, and then after that, New World Order, which tells you things have changed. You, who doesn't like to change, would have to change.
I figured December 21st, 2012, I'm toast anyways. Folks, we're speaking with Nancy Kilpatrick.
We're all holding our breath till then.
We're having a lot of fun tonight. We're talking about vampires. If you're just joining us, settle in. Lots of time. We've just gotten started. These are all Canadian stories, folks, in this book. Evolve 2.
No.
They're not all Canadian stories. I stand corrected, but most of
Evolve,
them
are. The first book was all Canadian writers. The second book is a mix of other writers from elsewhere, but there's a lot of Canadian writers in there as well.
The ones I picked out to read from are all Canadian. So now you mentioned what I really nightfrightshow.com, folks. We're going to be all over the place. I can see tonight we're going to have a lot of fun. Nightfrightshow.com. Click on the book cover. We'll take you right to a place where you can order it from the comfort of your own armchair. And I hope you're drinking your coffee, your tea. If you're driving across the 401 or across the Trans-Canada up north in North Bay and you're listening to the show right now, just ease off the gas pedal ever so slightly. Let us take you on this ride, and we're going to creep you out in just a second. I'm going to read from the book. I've got several passages I want to read from various stories in here. Nancy, now, why vampires? You know, I'm sure you get asked this by every interview, who, you know, but I come back to this because, you know, vampires are not, you know, the most attractive things. Well, maybe perhaps now they are, but in those days when I was growing up, they were virtually the spawn of Satan. And obviously if they've changed now, but what attracted you to the undead?
Oh, I don't know. Satan? I don't know. It's very hard to say what attracts you to a particular area of reading or writing. But I've always liked the supernatural. I've always liked particularly vampires. For me, that's been the more interesting supernatural realm. The vampire, you're right. The vampire used to be pretty ugly. You know, the zombie is kind of the new vampire. Zombies are undead and they're hideous, they smelly and all that. Vampires used to be all that, but they've changed. They managed to evolve, if you will, and they've changed over time. And I would say, even really since Dracula, you can't really say that Dracula was unappealing physically, because he, in fact, was able to seduce a lot of women. Of course, he made a lot of men angry, but there you go. That's the vampire for you. And the stories that were also around at that time, like Carmela Sheridan Le Fanu wrote that Countess is not unattractive. Even in the very first story in English, The Vampire by John Polidori, although it may be based on a fragment by Lord Byron. That vampire is not unattractive. Varney the Vampire, another novel in English, very long novel that predates Dracula. Varney is not unattractive. He is suicidal, but that's another story. He dispatches himself into the volcano Vesuvius at the end because he feels so guilt-ridden, but that's, you know, British. What can I say? So, but they're the early, not the only ones, certainly. And there are some short stories, of course, before those. But basically, that vampire is not unattractive. Unattractive. They are attractive, or they wouldn't be able to seduce people. So this goes against the mythology which has gone through the centuries prior to that time, the Victorian era in the 1700s. Prior to that, vampires were unattractive. They were resuscitated corpses. They came out of graves. They usually came back for family members, and they were not the people you wanted to let in your door, let alone date. And now we have a whole different vampire on the go. So this is today. What can I say?
It's 2011. It surely is. Folks, we're speaking with Nancy Kilpatrick. The book has evolved too. She's all the way from Montreal, my ex-hometown, as you know. We're talking about all things vampire tonight, the undead. So just settle in, get ready, and the easy way to get the book, as always, full of great stories about vampires, short stories, and great way to get it, www.nightfrightshow.com. Now, as Nancy just explained, the book is divided into 3 specific sections. There's pre-apocalypse, there's apocalypse, and New World Order. Actually, post-apocalypse. I apologize for that. The one I'm going to read right now is from the pre-apocalypse section. I'm not going to read the whole story. I'm just going to read a section from it. And it's by Michael Lawrenson, and it's called 6 Underground. Can you tell us a little bit about Mike?
He's in Montreal. I can tell you that.
Must be the bagels. Okay, let me read from this now.
That's a great story. That's a great.
Sure, they're all great stories. Are you
They
kidding
are
me?
great. Yeah, there's 2. There's not one bad one in there.
Absolutely. Mrs. Rational nodded. It's not that I disagree with you about vampires. I think we, as a society, could and should find a way to integrate them. But that's not our job here. Can you imagine integrating vampires into society? But this is, you know, this is what we're looking at. We're just positioning, say, immigrants, for example, or you know, in the old days we used to say people of color. This is what's taking place in this story. Connor stared back at her. If he lost her support, then there was no hope for a guilty verdict. Was it enough that he had convinced one person that vampires deserved equal treatment? He had come to see justice done for a girl whose only crime was to have been bitten in the neck. Could he live with having altered one person's perception towards the undead? Now I just want to jump to the next page, and I said, that's not where your heart is. Connor walked over to the view screen in the wall and ordered it to show him the evidence menu again. He selected the video footage of the beating obtained from a security camera. He skipped to the point where one of the boys thrust the shaft of wood into the girl's chest. It penetrated on his 3rd attempt. You sly bastard, he said. Now, this is an incredible story. It really gripped me because, you know, like, we're talking about vampires and they're the spawn of Satan, but the idea is, folks, we're bringing it to the modern realm, and as with all good art, it reflects society. And how are we treating minorities? Is there inequality happening in our society now? How do we perceive injustice? How do we deal with injustice? And I was wondering if we could talk about that for a little bit, and Michael's perspective, and why you chose his story to be included in this great anthology.
Well, I mean, it certainly is that. The story is, it's been likened by reviewers to 12 Angry Men. And it's a jury that has met. and a girl has been bitten, and they're trying to figure out who is to blame here. And there's a little bit of blaming the victim kind of thing as well, or blaming the kids that were supposedly doing this, but they may or may not have. And it's a jury trying to figure out the evidence. There happens to be a vampire on the jury because this is the future. So, and they're sequestered below ground. I just thought it was a really interesting way of looking at the vampire in current society, or in the realm of society that we are moving into with this book, which is that vampires are integrated. They're part of our world. And because they're part of our world, they're going to be part of everything, including juries and the justice system. So it's an amazing story, really. A number of reviewers have picked it out as one of the really, really good ones in the book. So,
you know, folks, and I'm just going to plug the book again. It's called Evolve 2. Nancy Kilpatrick's our guest. She edited the book, put all the stories together. It's a selection of a bunch of short stories about vampires, modern day vampires that are going to be in the future. And you're going to see, I'm going to read from another one that is actually placed in space. Oh yeah, this is incredible. It's taking vampires in the literary sense to realms that have never before, geez, I sound like William Shatner all of a sudden. That have never been
Canadian.
Hey. And I'm kind of looking more and more like him, I think, at this point. All that to say, folks, is what I like about the book is it takes vampires into new directions, and I think it has to evolve for sure. Now, let's go back to Nancy. I want to talk to her some more about what it's like to be a horror writer. What are the things that you're up against day in, day out, trying to find new ideas, trying to find new hooks?
Trying to find time to write. And this is, it's a difficulty for anybody who works at home. There's so many things that you have to do in your home, and when it mixes up with your job, because you're not going out for your job, it's very difficult, because there's always laundry, and there's always shopping to do, and there's cleaning, and this and that, and you have to feed the cat. Everything is constant, Yeah, so there's not really I don't find any difficulties in terms of writing or editing, which is, I am the editor of Evolve 2, as opposed to a writer in there. But yeah, I don't find difficulty writing. I love to write. It's a passion for me that has driven me a lot of my life, and essentially I like to just sit at the computer and live in a dream world and put that dream world out onto paper, which is the first part of it, and hope that something coherent comes out of me, so that I can then sculpt it or craft it afterwards and try and make it understandable to other people. And it's pretty amazing, really, being a writer. A number of people, when writers are in a good mood, which is not always, when we feel hopeful and positive, I have heard people say this, instead of being bitter and cynical, but I've heard people say this, that it is the most amazing life, and I agree with that when I'm feeling positive and hopeful, because really, you get to just live your dream, is what it is. There's always positives, there's always negatives with everything, and certainly writing has both, but to be able to take your vision and put it onto paper, or in the case of an anthology, to select stories that complement my vision of what this book would be about, what I'm trying to get across to readers. All of that is just an amazing opportunity, and the fact that other people can plug into that and appreciate what I have trying to do with an anthology or with a piece of writing, be touched or affected by it, and feel that it matters to them in some way. This always blows me away.
There's always that symbiotic relationship between the reader and what's written, isn't there? Now, in your case, do you draw upon personal experiences when you write and incorporate them inside the narrative? And I guess as an extension of that, have you had your own paranormal experiences as well?
I do sometimes draw from experiences, but often it's not a direct correlation. I'll take an experience, or it doesn't even have to be something that happened to me. It could be something I've seen, or something someone has said, or anything, a person I know, but I kind of work from that, but it always gets fictionalized, it's dramatized, and it becomes more than what it was. So it's not like an article, it's not nonfiction where you go out the door and you see an accident and you come home and you write about that accident exactly as it happened. It's not like that. There's more, for me, a feeling that goes with whatever happens, and the feeling is the thing that I bring, and the feeling will sometimes bring about the descriptions or pieces of what I have seen, say an accident, that will come into it, but I'm working more from feelings. Different writers work in different ways, of course, but for me, it's the feelings that get me into the story or the novel or even the anthology, because I'm working with an idea, like Evolve 2, is to show the vampire how the vampire will go into the future as presumably we evolve. So, getting the writers to think about the future for humanity and then saying, okay, there's this creature that has been with us for all this time. How will this creature also be when you envision human beings in 2012, 2050, the year 3000? As you see us, how will you see them? So that's a vision that, is hopefully happening in that book. I wanted it to happen, and I feel that I've made it happen. So to me, it's a delight to be able to do that and to be able to work from an emotional charge, I guess you could call it, to make this vision happen.
Have you had your own paranormal experiences, and could you share them with us?
I've had a couple. I think I've had fairly mundane experiences that are personal. They're not extraordinary. When my mother died, for example, that was unexpected. The phone rang and I knew. But I think many, many, many people have had that experience around a parent. That's fairly common. It's just I feel there's almost like a cellular vibration that happens. Certainly there's a cellular connection with a parent, and something else is going on.
Was it there a comforting feeling that was associated with that?
It wasn't comforting and it wasn't horrifying, it just was. But I can tell you one experience that I have had that I wrote about. I've had a few that are sort of oddball things. This one is, I was married a while ago, and my husband, not anymore, my husband's mother was dying, so he was in the town where they were. And so I was sitting at my computer writing, as always, and he was away. And I knew his mother wasn't doing well. And as I was sitting there, I happened to be writing a ghost story, as it turns out. And behind me, in that place where we lived, there were very high bookshelves. They went about 20 feet up to the ceiling. And up at the top, I had placed a few things. And one of them was this doll someone gave me years and years ago. And the doll was a Raggedy Ann. And that doll was sitting up there. And I was writing this story, and I started to get a creepy feeling, and I don't usually get creeped out by my own writing. It just doesn't happen. And even movies, I don't get affected in that way normally. So I had this creepy feeling, and I thought, oh, maybe it's because I'm by myself here. Who knows what it is? And all of a sudden, there was a noise behind me, a huge crash. This doll had fallen from the top of the high bookshelf onto this table, which had some seashells and other things on it, and so the doll had fallen. And it was such a startling thing that I immediately checked the clock to see the time, and it was 12:13. So when I talked to my ex-husband the next day, I said, he told me that his mother had gone into a coma the night before, and I said, you wouldn't happen to know the time of that coma, would you? Like, was anybody aware of that? Thinking that was really a long shot, but they had an in-home nurse for her, and he said, yes, the nurse recorded it as 12:13. So it was the exact time. But what's even odder than this is that the doll that fell, Raggedy Ann, his mother's name was Ann.
My God.
Yeah, isn't that an interesting...
Goosebump factor.
Whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, it's funny how that happens, eh? Your story is unique, but very common at the same time too. And I often say, I often say it's going to be funny if the one thing gets the whole world to unite and stop shooting each other's butts off is ghost stories. So there you go. Well, because everybody has them, right? I mean, I have a Zimbabwe ghost. People send me ghost stories all the time, and all the time.
Do you have any yourself, Brent?
None I want to share on camera. Thank you very much, because
poke it out of the rest of us.
I'm in the studio alone tonight, and thank you very. No. Believe me, I got the because of the vampire thing. I've got the garlic on the windows, and just kidding.
They've evolved. They've
evolved. The crosses don't even work anymore. What the heck is that about?
I know.
There goes that idea.
So we better learn to get along, right?
No kidding. Folks, the book is called Evolve 2. Our guest tonight, Nancy Kilpatrick. Easy way to get this book, as well as all our guests' books. www.nightfrightshow.com. Just click on the book cover. That'll take you right to a spot where you can order the book from the comfort of your own home. Tonight's a great night to do that. If you're just joining us, settle in, folks. We've just got underway. We're talking about vampires tonight. Nosferatu, Vampire, and the Undead. Creepy stuff tonight, but rest assured, it's television, so just relax. You just keep those lights on and everything will be fine. Trust me. Nancy, let's go back. I want to read something else. As I was saying, folks, the book is divided into 3 sections. The second section, I'm going to read a section from as soon as I find it. Oh, yeah. Whoops. That was the last one. Here we go, as I fold down my edges here. This is called Chelsea Morning. This is by a writer by the name of David Tocher. Have I got his name correctly?
It's Tocher.
Tocher, okay.
Yeah, who's also in Montreal. You picked, I think the 2 writers that are in Montreal, you picked them.
I have a third.
Well, that one's in Montreal, but I don't think so.
There you go. The Scorching. That's when an asteroid hit Earth. Before it struck, the news said it might be coming. Most people thought it would be a false alarm. Nobody was prepared, so how come you're still alive? Jessica asks. Some of us got some supplies together and went under the streets, into the metro stations, the tunnels. We've been down there. There's only bodies. A lot of people died from radiation and starvation. A lot were murdered, like my boyfriend. Jessica leaned forward. Help us find them. Why should I help you? What choice do you have? I'm not afraid to die. Who says we'll kill you? We can do a lot worse than that. In 200 years, we've had a lot of practice making people suffer. Chelsea's will hardened. Suffering didn't frighten her. Suffering defined her. You're going to have to do better than that if you want to scare me. Jessica's hands balled into fists. Want my help? Fine. There's something you got to do for me. Jessica gave a tight-lipped smile. You're hardly in a position to negotiate. Make me one of you. And of course, she's talking to a vampire. Creepy stuff. Creepy stuff. Just to think that an apocalyptic event has taken place and asteroids hit the Earth. They've gone down to the metro. Montreal has a wonderful metro. And apparently it's full of vampires. Who knew? But, that whole scenario, again, folks, from the book, just amazing. It scared the bejesus out of me to think that she wants to be turned. In my mind, of course, I come from the classic, era of Christopher Lee and all the rest of those fellas, where we were terrified of the vampires. Now, all of a sudden, she wants to become one. Somehow, it's her only way out and a way for her to survive. Can we talk about that juxtaposition and how things have really evolved?
Well, I mean, if you read the story, you see the life of this girl before the apocalypse, and then from the apocalypse on. There's a lot of justification for this. And again, if you want to talk socially, this certainly taps into the idea of people who are victimized in society in various ways, and the things that they do out of desperation to survive.
And this is what they do. And now she wants to be a vampire. the darkness and everything. I guess that's what attracted me to the story, was the fact that these things are in the caves, the tunnels, and this is, you know, it's
a dark story, and it's a very rough story. You know, it's not a sweet, smooth. If you want to compare it to the story you read before, Michael's story about the jury, that's a sort of smoother story in a sense. It's more the sort of, I guess, what you call the middle class of society. It's that realm. This is not that realm. This is the rougher, kind of lower end, where people are scrounging, and the vampires are not particularly different than this. So
it's really survival at its core.
It is.
It certainly is. Yeah. Now, I was going to reference Nosferatu here, which is that wonderful silent film, which to this day, I find scary. And there's
it's
no
very
sound.
creepy, huh?
Oh, it really is.
It is. It is.
I think because so much is left to the imagination. There's no special effects. Well, none worth mentioning, really, except the one at the end, I guess.
The shadows are great. The shadows are really good in that.
The way it's shot, precisely.
Yeah.
And that is cinematography, and I think that's something that's lost in today's... I guess today's excitement and with CGI effects. I mean, we can do so much with computers now in terms of filmmaking that I think somehow that whole storytelling has been lost sometimes. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I agree with you. And certainly there's a lot of schlock vampire movies around. It's really hard to find something that's what we would call wonderful or great in that realm anymore. A lot of it is written for young adults anyway. It's meant to be aimed at kids. I mean, younger kids. So,
but young female kids.
No, not all of them. That's Twilight stuff. But you could even look at Fright, the new remake of Fright Night. That's, maybe it appeals to adults, but it's really aimed at young adults because it has kids that are the protagonists in the story, the ones who drive it. So it's really aimed at young people. I
prefer the original, actually, and the original actually.
Oh yeah, Chris Sorensen in his great hot gray left. Wow.
But it was.
Who knew gray leather would be so wondrous, huh?
But there was that sensuality again that was emitting from the vampire. But I was terrified of this guy, and and that, I guess that's what I like about horror. This is what I want from horror: something to be terrified about. Even the new Dracula that was written by the great-grandson, I think, or
great-grandnephew, Ted Soker.
Yeah, he's turned Dracula into some kind of angel that's going to go help God now. And I don't like that direction. Like, Dracula, for me, was the epitome of the spawn of Satan, virtually.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's writing, from where his great-granduncle took off, right, with Dracula. So basically, this is what happens next, and this is the child of Florence and no, not Florence. That's Bram Stoker.
No, I know who you mean. I can't remember.
You know who I mean? Yeah.
I have the book here somewhere.
So he's writing about the offspring of Mina and Jonathan, basically,
there you go.
And the offspring, what happens to that offspring. So this is the next, generation, if you will.
When you were auditioning text for the book, I suspect you had a lot of things coming in. Did you give feedback? Did you guide them? You mentioned that you had a vision before. Did you guide them towards a vision that you kind of held, a loose global vision, if you will?
In that particular book, no, because I think it was pretty clear what I was looking for, future being 2012 onward. So, I said it can go into the realm of science fiction. So it wasn't exactly a difficult concept. I would say the first book, Evolve, was more of a difficult concept. And the book I'm working on now, which is called Dance Macabre, Close Encounters with the Reaper, which has nothing to do with vampires, but that is a really difficult concept for people to grasp. So it depends what it is, but this particular one, Evolve 2, it was not that hard for people who are writers to understand, where will the vampire go? This is what we do as writers. We're always imagining and dreaming and what if, and that's kind of what that was about. So it wasn't hard to get people to think along those lines, no. And in terms of what comes in, I do give editorial guidance to people if their story is what I'm looking for, and if there's a problem with the story that can be relatively easily fixed. For example, if someone writes a story and everything about it is wondrous until they get to the end and it fizzles, then I'll bring that to their attention and they determine, what can happen that would make it a more interesting ending for the reader if they want to work on it. And usually writers do. Especially professional writers, they're very open to the idea of working with their material. Most of them are very grateful to have editorial feedback, because that's rare nowadays in this world. It's very rare to get feedback. A lot of editors just acquire, and they don't do any work with the writers at all. Me, I'm very interested in making sure that the stories are good and that they hang together, that things work, there's no loose ends, because I'm a writer. So this is important to me. And I'm also a reader. I want to read good stories. So I assume other people want to read good stories too. I will give that type of feedback to people whose stories will fit the book, who have a good chance of getting included. Yes.
Okay, fair enough, folks. We're speaking with Nancy Kilpatrick all the way from Montreal. What part of Montreal are you in, by the way?
I'm in what's called Little Italy, Petit Patrie.
I know where that is, actually,
Okay.
because I grew up in a place called Verdun.
Oh, yes. That's the other end of the city.
I know, and then NDG, because Concordia was close to there. NDG, folks, stands for Notre Dame de Grâce, or as we used to say in NDG, no damn good. Evolve 2 is the name of the book. The book can be got at www.nightfrightshow.com. Just click on the book cover. That'll take you right to a place where you can order it from the comfort of your own home, right online, folks. Should arrive 24, 48 hours, something like that. No problem whatsoever. The book is all about vampires. It's short stories about vampires. The word evolve, where the writers believe, the individual writers believe, vampires are going to go in the future. What kind of scenarios surround those vampires? We've seen them evolve already from these horrific creatures, these demonic creatures, where now they're going to high school and dating your daughters, your sisters, and whatever. You touched on an incredible point before, and several weeks ago we had a fellow by the name of Matt Moak on. Now, Matt Moak, folks, just check the archives, www.nightfrightshow. He was our Halloween guest. We talked about zombies. And he's a friend of George Romero's, and he is actually president of the Zombie Research Society. And we were talking about that subject that you just mentioned, the fact that zombies have now replaced vampires. And because I'm a musician, I just thought of a music analogy where modern country now has replaced rock and roll. So things do evolve. Now, do you think they're going to go back? Do you think we'll go back to that demon? Who knows?
Well, there is actually a shift now to have more of the old school vampires again. There's been a few films and books that kind of show that vampire. One of the more recent movies is called Steakland. It's not steak that you eat, but the other type. And it's a post-apocalyptic future world where there's the land is mapped out, and this part belongs to vampires, and this part belongs to humanity. And then there's some humans that have gone nuts, of course, there always are, and they're what you call cannibals, and they have their own territory. And it's people trying to get to what they call New Eden. And this is supposed to be a safe land. So the vampires are not very pretty, and they're not the type of vampires that you would like to date at all. So you would just want to avoid them. And I think there's a few other movies I've seen, some books as well. There is a tendency to kind of try to go back to some kind of more ferocious creature. I think a lot of that, I would say, is in reaction to things like Twilight more. There's a lot of people that resent Twilight I personally don't resent Twilight. It's not my cup of tea,
Me
but I love the vampire and have collected vampire books for oodles of years and have 2,000 titles and movie posters. I've got all kinds of vampire stuff. So to me, it's part of it. You know, it's a piece that fits into a bigger puzzle. And I don't see it quite in the same way, but a lot of writers particularly really resent the idea of taking the vampire and turning her into this good boyfriend that sparkles and does no wrong, and you know, they want the vampire to have more edge, more danger to it. So the sinister element is, I guess, missing, and people want to see that sometimes. So I think there's a lot of different types of vampires, and there's room for them all. But the old zombie type vampire is certainly still alive, and if not kicking, at least biting. So that's still there. I wouldn't say that zombies have replaced vampires. I'd say that right now zombies are hot. They're big. And there's been a ton of zombie books and zombie movies, and more coming out. I think Brad Pitt is making one, World War Z, or Z as we say in Canada. So there's a whole bunch of stuff out there. But this is now, and there are fads in writing, there's fads in films, and right now the zombie is the big thing. Vampires have never gone out of fashion, so they're not going to disappear.
Let me ask you this, Nancy. Where does the zombie differ from the vampire? Both are dead. No, but really, both desire some sort of human sustenance to sustain themselves. Where do they differ?
But zombies eat flesh, vampires just drink blood. And a zombie, you know, also turns its victim unintentionally, because when you're bitten by a zombie, you become a zombie. A vampire has a choice, usually, whether it turns someone or not, because the process is a little different. Old school, yes, a vampire bites somebody, takes their blood, that person wakes up a vampire. Then you get the exchange of blood idea. So the vampire has to take blood, but give blood to turn someone. Today, the vampire has a choice. It's not a question of just doing it. It's a question of, you know, do you want to turn this person or not? And for what reason? And sometimes the reason is love, and sometimes it's revenge, and all kinds of reasons why vampires do things just like human beings. So, yeah.
Okay, www.nightfrightshow.com, folks. Click on the book cover. The book is called Evolve 2. Our guest tonight, Nancy Kilpatrick, all the way from Montreal. The book is full of wonderful, wonderful new stories, new ideas about vampires. Some of them are going to darn right creep you right out like they have with me, and others are going to make you chuckle and laugh. It's a wonderful, wonderful anthology. Perfect time for this. I mean, you know, it's cold outside. It really is. We're about to get hit with snow at any second, I suspect. It's kind of creepy. You know, you got the fire going at night. Great book to nestle in with and just kind of creep yourself out. You know what's great when you have an anthology like this of short stories? If you don't like one, there's another one coming up just around the corner. Just turn the page, right? Nancy, I want to ask you, what creeps you out?
Oh, being on television. Very uncomfortable. I don't like this.
You don't like it at all? I think you're doing fantastic.
No, I liked it better when you just had a radio show and I didn't have to see you or me as I'm looking at both of us now. It's a little easier because I feel like, okay, I can sit here in my pajamas by myself and eat and drink while we're talking. But now I have to kind of have this, I don't know, personable, look like a human being kind of thing.
Folks, I have a confession to make. Don't get an image, but notice how they're always headshots. You don't want to know what's going on down there.
I wish you hadn't told me what was happening with you, what you're wearing, because that's really upset me. But
sorry. And again, if you're getting a visual, Nancy, remember we are in the winter and it's very cold out there. Okay. Let's talk more. I'm going to go serious now. I'm going to take a leap because around the time that you were on the show, actually, I had a fella on that claimed he was indeed a real vampire. And I was terrified because I had no idea he was. No, I'll tell you why. Not because of his vampire makeup or whatever. I was terrified somebody listening or somebody watching was going to go track him down and try and stick a goddamn stake in their heart, in his heart. You know, this is what terrifies me. Have you had any experience with that whole subculture? Because there is a whole subculture, even more sub than goth. If you think so, I don't know if goth is subculture, but have you had any experience with folks who believe they are real vampires and your impressions?
I've had people, you know, tell me that they're vampires. I haven't actually seen anyone. All right, I can't say I haven't seen anyone drink blood, but I have seen people not drink, not as in the sense of a cup of blood, but certainly back in the day, say the 80s and early 90s, it wasn't that uncommon to run into people who were blood fetishists, or in my world, it wasn't that uncommon. And so I would occasionally see people taking some blood. We're talking small amounts, you know, like a cut. But I'm not sure they needed it to live. Maybe psychologically they did. I don't know. Certainly physically they probably didn't. I haven't run into anyone who I would consider to be a vampire in the undead sense, that they've come back from the dead or come back from the grave or been transformed or will live eternally or any of that. No, I haven't. I've certainly run into what you'd call psychic vampires. There's many of those around. Those people that sort of eat your brain, eat your time, eat your energy and all of that and just suck the life right out of you. Plenty of those on the planet. Yeah, so, but not real vampires in the sense that we define a vampire as a blood-drinking, necessary-to-life creature that has come back from the dead or changed from being dead and will live eternally or certainly many more lifetimes than the normal person. I haven't run into one of those. I'm open. Maybe there's someone out there that is, but I haven't seen them. I'm just telling you my experience.
Well, this was a segue. I'll tell you why. Why do we... Well, because I'm just curious why, as a society, we cling to the vampire. I mean, the vampire is more popular now than ever. It's all over the television. It's all over the... You know, as you said, it's all Twilight's all in the cinema right now. And it is so strong that, again, this subculture has come up, and there's people now declaring themselves as vampire. Why has this character, why has this social phenomena virtually put roots in the ground and has grown phenomenally? It's stronger now than ever. I think it's stronger than even when Nosferatu came out in Dracula.
Well, there's probably a lot of reasons. I'm not somebody who can analyze particularly well why the general society does things. I do know that the vampire is a romantic image now. It may be that people want romance in a world where there's not so much human contact as there used to be because of social networking, for example. So many people I know say that they spend a lot of time on Facebook. I spend time on Facebook, and because you're getting your kind of kick in terms of friendship there. That's not the same. And people are always saying, well, what did I do before the computer? How did I spend my time before computers? How did I spend my time before Facebook? And I guess it was people had more interaction then. So the chance of having these kind of romantic connections or person-to-person connections even that people want, they're harder now in the world. I don't know why. That may not be totally so for people who are much younger. When I say much younger, I'm saying high school students, college students, because they're thrust into environments where there are people their age, they're all single, they're all happy to see each other, they socialize a lot. But I think as people get older, when they hit 30 and onward, it just is a different world. And,
30 is old?
Older.
Well, thank you. And I guess the vampire, we've discussed this before, is that ultimate bad boy, isn't he? He's the biker guy.
Of course, yeah.
That we used to be terrified of in the 50s and stuff. Not me, folks.
Well,
I'm not quite of that
you
generation.
You were terrified. The biker's always been attractive, too, in a
guy.
certain way. You were?
Yeah.
Oh, very cool. Were you part of a gang? Well, you're not going to talk about this, are you?
Well, it was more a bicycle gang when I was 10 years old.
Hells Angels.
But yeah, well, there you go.
Okay.
Because from Montreal, Hells Angels, the bikers, we're having fun here, folks. The book is called Evolve 2. Nancy Kilpatrick's a wonderful guest tonight. We're talking about all things vampiric. The book is full of short stories, folks, and you're going to want to get this book. This is a great time of year for a book like this. He's nestled in, and they're short stories. They're going to take it in different directions. Each one is in a different direction that a vampire could possibly go into. The whole scenario, the whole composite, if you will, of what's around a vampire, the mythology, etc. Some of them are going to scare you. Some of them are going to make you cry. Some of them are romantic. Some of them are going to make you laugh for sure. www.nightfrightshow.com. Click on the book cover. It'll take you right to a place where you can order the book from the comfort of your own home.
Well, I should also say, if I could just say about this book, there are, as I said, a lot of Canadian writers in the book, but there are international writers as well. Tanith Lee is in there, John Shirley. There's quite a few international folks too. But what's interesting about this book too is this is a Canadian publisher, and I think it's really great to be able to get genre fiction out of Canada, which we don't have a lot of. One of the interesting things about Evolve, the first book, is that it was a huge success in the United States because it was exported there, and basically, that's an achievement for what you would consider a small Canadian press, like Edge Science Fiction and Fantasy. And then they went ahead and they did the second book, which is also now available in the U.S. So this is, it's kind of great guns for them, and it's a nice way for Canadians to appear in books and get more readership than they might get in another type of Canadian book on vampires, if there were such a thing, which there isn't.
Thank you for that. And that's so important, folks. This is why I started this show. There's a zillion authors like Nancy and some of the folks in this book. Mark Lefebvre, he was in the previous book. Steve Vernon's been on the show. He's in this book. All Canadian writers, they can't get the time of day on our national broadcaster. Not the time of day.
No, it's true. It's true. It's true, because genre fiction is not considered writing, which is an idiotic approach to take. It makes me very angry. There's all this focus on literature, literary writing, as though it's the only thing that can reach people and affect them and have any meaning. But if you look at a lot of the classics, I mean, what could be more classic writing than books like Dracula, Frankenstein, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Picture of Dorian Gray, even something like Wuthering Heights. I mean, that is like the perfect demon lover in Heathcliff. I mean, there are lots of books out there that fall into the dark category, but for some reason in Canada, there is this approach. Who knows why, but it's very sad. You can't get books reviewed very easily. We've had lots and lots. So I think for Evolve, we had about 40 reviews. They were all positive. None of the mainstream press here in Canada reviewed it. Or I shouldn't say that. I think the Winnipeg Free Press did something on it. Winnipeg did, yes. And then there was an interview with somebody in one of the Calgary papers. But, I mean, you cannot get a paper, even in Montreal, where I live. Yeah. Two of the writers are in Evolve too. No, you don't get reviews here. And that's, as we know, that it's a cliche about Canada. It's just ridiculous to not look at your own people. And this is not realistic. I wish that the world would grow up. You take care of your own first. Then you take care of others. You don't starve your own children and give the food to someone else. You take care of your family first, the people that are close to you first. And it's this very strange, almost, I don't even know where this comes from. It seems to be like an Anglo thing, I hate to say it, but it is, that you don't give any credence to the person who is close to you, or close in the sense I'm talking societal now, the people that are in your backyard that are doing something of interest. You ignore them and you go for the people far away. This is very particularly Canadian, and I don't ever understand it, and it's frustrating to a lot of people in the arts here, and it's irritating as hell. I've said my piece.
Yeah, CBC seems to be very closed, and I take liberal shots at them now because I tried to get this show, as you know, on CBC 3 times, and each time they told me no ghosties on CBC, and my response, of course, was, when you got a room full of dinosaurs, who needs ghosts, right? But just to tell you,
nothing controversial.
Just to tell you about CBC, folks, as you know, I'm a composer. I compose music for television and film, and I'm very proud. I've just scored a local Kingston film called 21 Brothers. Fabulous film about Canadians in the First World War. All that to say is I was supplying music to the CBC. I was making about $400 or $500 a year off them with a music library I have. They signed a multi-million-dollar deal with an American company. So now my tax dollars, your tax dollars too, are going to pay for my competitors in the States to make music for CBC. Does that sit right with you?
We all know that there's no talent in Canada. I mean, you have to go to the U.S. to find the Canadian talent because the Americans recognize Canadians. Look how many movie stars, how many
Dan Aykroyd, and on and on and on.
And he makes good vodka too.
And you know
that? But you can't buy it because you're in Ontario, but I can buy it because I'm in Quebec. I'm talking about the Crystal Skull.
Yeah, I know.
You know this, right?
And I had Dan's dad on, actually. He's in the archives, www.nightfrightshow. He wrote a terrific book. And if you want to know why Dan wrote Ghostbusters, just listen to that show. It's fabulous. I'm trying to get him back on. We've only got a couple of minutes left. I got to jump to this. It's called Red Planet. Bev Vincent wrote it. Isaac removes the mask from his face and a mantle of electronic sensors from his head, expecting alarms to go off. Nothing happens. The needles float away when he pulls the IVs from his hands. The monitoring equipment continues to chirp, and he peels the patches from his chest. Notice how I reenact that. He does the rest of the restraints and drifts to the entrance of his chamber, where he braces himself. He's in outer space, folks. I got to cut to the chase here because we're running out of time. Shaking his head, he glides to the hall and examines the monitor outside his door. The mission clock reads T plus 128 days, which means they should gain Mars orbit in 4 days if they're on schedule. Isaac floats to the corridor, to the next compartment. Her vital sign. Okay, just let me jump over here. I really gotta. The irony of his situation doesn't escape him. He's 200 million kilometers from Earth, and his only source of sustenance, you see, folks, is a handful of people. You see, folks, he's the first vampire in space, but he's also the first to perish in space, unless he comes up with a plan fast. And if you want to know what that plan is, www.nightfrightshow.com. Order the book. Fabulous stuff. I mean, just absolutely mind-bending stuff.
And I should mention also, if I could just insert this, that for some reason all the anthologies that I edit, it's not I intend this, but it happens this way. Half the stories are by women, which you wouldn't know because Brent didn't read any of those, but there's pretty well half and half.
I think I did.
Did you say that?
Well, I read the whole book. And I purposely didn't read the bios. There's bios of each author at the end of each story.
Bev is a guy.
Who knew? Okay, so I didn't know that.
You do now.
Yeah. I just read the book and I said, geez, I really like these three. But that, again, is to my bias. I'm sure there's going to be stories in there
No, it's not a bias. You just picked out what you like. I was just throwing that in, that there are, that's unusual, especially in the horror dark fantasy field. I mean, I've been, as a writer, in anthologies where I've been the only woman, or one of two. So this is unusual to have half. Okay.
Okay, sorry about that. No, unlike the radio show, I'm on a 58:30 I have to get everything in by, so there you go. Nancy Kilpatrick's been our guest tonight, folks. Terrific book. I can't say enough about it. A lot of Canadian artists in here, a lot of Canadian authors, Canadian publisher, big-time Canadian publisher. Support them, but I hate to even say that. Just don't support them because they're Canadian. Buy the book because it's good. Who cares if it's Canadian? www.nightfrightshow.com. Click on the book cover, order this book. Nancy Kilpatrick from Montreal, who's going to send me a dozen bagels for Christmas. I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm Brent Holland from Night Fright. See you next time.
You're listening to Night Fright and your host, Brent Holland. The time is now. Your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy radio.